I'm Nadira Tudor, and this is The Fall of Kabul, a soldier's story. Was it worth it? I think we'll start with what you were doing when you heard that Kabul had fallen.
Well, when Kabul had fallen, I was already finished my business with the army. After serving 3 years in the Navy and 15 in the regular army of Romania, I decided to turn to a NATO international civilian position. So when that happened, I was not serving in the army anymore. However, what happened recalled a lot of memories from the past, and I started to count the guys we lost over there, and I started to ask myself if their lives were lost in vain, because you invest time, you invest effort, you invest your feelings in what's going on, and then you draw the line and you ask yourself, what's the outcome? And the outcome was so blurry and so bleak that I just couldn't believe that this is what it has to be. I mean, I remember that we used to foster some friendships with the locals, and myself, I've never heard about them anymore after I left Afghanistan, and I wondered myself, what do they do now? Are they still there? What's happening with them? What's happening with their families, with their relatives, and so on? I mean, it's very hard to understand everything what's going on, but your thoughts are going here and there to places where you left something behind.
And you've mentioned, we've only just started this interview, you've mentioned a number of times the close relationships that you formed, both of you. And you've mentioned the Afghans.
Yes.
And I just want to talk about that. And I'm feeling your pain because you spent a lot of time, Vlad, with some of the local Afghans that you're mentioning now, and the fact that you don't know what's happened to them. Are you able to firstly describe those relationships and how they formed and what they meant to you?
Yeah, sure. I used to be a comm guy, a signal guy. However, when I volunteered to go in Afghanistan, there was no place for signal guys in that battalion in 2010. So therefore, I volunteered to go as an infantryman, basically. I used to do a lot of jobs over there, but because of my comms knowledge, I also dealt with the communication within the team, within the patrol, and everything we were doing over there. But at the same time, because of my, because I am fluent in English, I was backing my patrol commander in interacting on one hand with the interpreter and on the other hand with the locals. So during almost all our activities over there, I was on one hand next to our platoon commander and patrol commander, and on the other hand next to the interpreter. So Tarjiman, as they used to call them in Pashto. And this guy, the interpreter, was not always the same. We used to change them from time to time in order to avoid most probably the collective intel and so on. But sitting next to a man for, I don't know, more than a few days, you're going to interact with him, you're going to talk to him, ask him about his family, his relatives. He will ask you about your family back home and what make you go in that country. And then you're going to go ask him what make you go take a position like this. And I see that you're highly educated. Why don't you try to do more with your life, and so on. But these kind of relationships I formed, and honestly, I think I can recall the names of at least 5 to 6 interpreters that were sitting next to me during all that mission, and I know nothing about them nowadays.
How does that make you feel?
Well, honestly, I saw that relationship as just a sort of a formal one. I'm an introvert. I'm not going very deep when it comes to express myself. Therefore, I cannot say that it affects me a lot and I'm thinking of it every day. However, I still collected some stories from them, and I still remember those stories. And I still remember, for example, the love of one of our interpreters, which used to have such a complicated name that we gave him a Romanian one. His love for a young daughter of a teacher, and because he didn't have money enough to buy her, I suppose you know about this custom in Afghanistan to buy your wife or to pay for a price for your wife, he decided to work for us as an tarjuman.
Like a dowry.
Yes.
Vlad, I'd like to understand why you joined the military initially, and what you thought then and what you think now.
During 9/11, I was finishing my studies and preparing myself to join the army, because Romania was not part of NATO back then. We still had mandatory military service, and somehow it was understandable that all of us, those finishing our studies, our high school, whatever it was, were supposed to go serve in the army for at least 1 year, and then go back to the civilian life, let's say. And then I joined the army as a conscript in 2002, when actually the operations in Afghanistan actually started for about, I don't know, half of a year or something already. And then I decided to stay with the army because it was a mean for me to get to the university without asking the aid of my parents. But then when I volunteered myself to go to Afghanistan, I was young. I wanted such an experience, because they say in the army that you can train as much as you like. You never become a real soldier until you go into a combat zone, which I agree, because nothing transforms you more, and nothing gives you more, let's say, trust in yourself and what you can do with your own forces, along with which stays in your power, along with your comrades, let's say, than such an experience. So I was a privileged because I volunteered, but there were some other guys which had to go. They really had to go over there. But for me, it was a choice. And I've never regretted, honestly. But at the same time, I've never volunteered to go once more and do what I basically did.
Were there poignant moments, were there moments that stood out for you when you were deployed in Afghanistan where you thought, I don't really know how to deal with this, I don't know why I'm here? Were there any moments during those deployments that really stood out and affected you?
Honestly, I remember them very vividly. I remember our first patrols briefings when all of that information coming from the intel was presented to us, and we were told that some attacks are expected, IEDs on the roads here and there, and while attacked by IED we might be caught in an ambush or something like that. And suddenly I realized that it's about life and death. And I started to wonder myself, and I'm gonna go back home alive from here, having all of these dangers surrounding us. I mean, it's not like you wouldn't expect that, but you wouldn't expect it to be at that scale. So then, after time, I learned how to live with that. And I learned
How do you live with that?
Well, you just start to understand that something may happen anytime, any moment, and you may just be caught in between, and that's it. You have to live with it. And every time I put my foot in the Humvee on my place, and I hang my weapon on the front chair, I knew and I realized very clearly in my mind that it might be the last time I'm doing it. And you cope with it. I'm telling you. You start to cope with it. And it's a sort of a very strange feeling because you start to acknowledge every moment from that point. I don't know, having a coffee with one of your teammates, or tasting a biscuit in the car, with much more, which all of your senses to a higher level, let's say, because you know it might be the last time you're doing it. And you just forget about it.
You obviously witnessed people, you're sitting here today, but there were people where you had that last biscuit with.
Yes.
And you had that last coffee with.
Indeed.
How were those moments?
Well, it's pretty hard to talk about that, honestly, even after more than 13 years. But at the beginning, you just don't realize what happened. Or, I'm not a psychologist, but I think it's a cope mechanism of the brain which doesn't want to perceive reality as it is. And at the beginning, I think under the influence of some hormones in your body, you're just doing your duty. You act as you were trained to act. You secure the area and so on. But then as soon as you're back in the base and you realize that your teammate is not next to you, when you really feel that moment, an avalanche of feelings comes towards you. So I remember that I lost one of our platoon's colleagues, which was actually from the same city with me. I'm not gonna say that we were the best friends, but we used to be neighbors in the same neighborhood, and we used to talk about the same plans we had to buy some apartments when coming back home. And we promised each other that we're gonna share information about how to buy apartments, what's the market price, so on. And suddenly this happened, and I'm back in the base. My bed was right next to his. And I'm sitting on my bed, watching towards his. And I see his slippers left, thrown away under the bed, as he used to. And I was always telling him not to do that anymore, because I don't like that. And I saw his pillow with the shape of his head still there. And then I realized he's not with us anymore. And that's it. Short story.
Tragic story. I have to ask you now, and you know, it's the burning question, isn't it? Of having experienced everything that you've experienced, was Afghanistan worth it?
Well, it's hard to answer this question honestly. I think overall it did. Up to a point. I mean, I'm not gonna count the lost lives in there, but thinking about the full part of the glass, I can recall the interactions with the local population. Indeed, as Phil mentioned briefly a few minutes ago. The fact that the pity we felt that somehow they were caught between a rock and a hard place, because on one hand they were very friendly with us. Because we used to be very friendly with them as well. We used to give children water and candies and biscuits and everything we had with us. I mean, I remember we used to fill in our backpacks with different stuff, thinking about that we may need them on the road, but coming back with the backpacks empty because we gave them to the kids. And I have plenty of stories like this, and not only with the kids, but mostly with them. But I felt pity for those people, because they didn't have an option. They didn't have the option to, let's say, support us, to collaborate with us fully. The kids were innocent, of course. They couldn't be threatened by the Taliban that if you go and take water one more time from the allied militaries, then we're gonna do this and that to you. However, their parents were. And I remember that where we were based, it was a baker which used to sell bread to us, bread dore, made by them over there. It was very cheap, it was very tasty, so we used to go and buy it pretty frequently, honestly. And he was threatened that if he continues to do that, we were told, he will suffer. And we find him beheaded in a trench a few days after. And then we ask ourselves, are we to be blamed? because we could have just not go and buy bread anymore. So this meant to be spared. But then we were his only customers somehow. I mean, his business was based on ourselves. And there are hard decisions, you know. It's tough to assess now. Was it worth it? Yes, up to a point.
Thank you for joining us on the Fall of Kabul, a soldier's story. For more episodes and in-depth exploration, visit us on YouTube and on podcast streaming platforms.